I turned 33 this year and something just sort of clicked. I want to eat healthier, want to move around a little bit. And in that endeavor, I have been super thankful for Green Chef. Green Chef makes it super easy to spend less time in the kitchen and more time enjoying summer, especially with their new Heat and Eat meals where you can enjoy a healthy, delicious meal in just 3 minutes. I have genuinely enjoyed every recipe that I've made from Green Chef, especially this one bulgur wheat dinner bowl that I keep bragging about because I made it. So if you're strapped for time but still want to eat healthy, I highly recommend Green Chef. Make this summer your healthiest yet with Green Chef. Head to greenchef.com/50magical and use code 50magical to get 50% off your first month, then 20% off for 2 months with free shipping. That's code 50magical at greenchef.com/50magical. Welcome to the Magical Overthinkers podcast, a show for thought spiralers, exploring the subjects we can't stop overthinking about, from laziness to people-pleasing. If you ever get the feeling that despite living in the information age, the world only seems to be making less sense, then you're in the right place. This podcast is here to soften the clash between the innately, naturally imperfect ways in which our minds work and the overwhelm of this time. It's here to help us think less about the things that don't matter and more about the things that do. I'm your host, Amanda Montell. Today, we're overthinking about indecision. In a way, it feels like this whole entire podcast has been leading up to this week's topic. Indecision in the digital age. It's a classic side effect of magical overthinking. This phrase that I keep using to describe the collision between our ingrained psychological shortcuts, the ways that the human mind has always made decisions imperfectly but well enough, and the brand new informationally overloaded era that we're living in. My book, The Age of Magical Overthinking, which was, I guess, the basis of this podcast, explored that phenomenon in a series of essays about cognitive biases in the information age, exploring topics from how the halo effect can explain celebrity worship and dethronement, and how proportionality bias can explain conspiratorial thinking and overcommitment to ideas of manifestation. And I'm excited to report that there's actually a newer book on the scene that investigates some of these similar topics in an actionable workbook-style way. Earlier this year, I discovered the book Ask This Book a Question, An Interactive Journey to Find Wisdom for Life's Big and Little Decisions by Vicki Tan. The book is described as a one-of-a-kind guide to smarter decision-making based on the science of cognitive bias and the wisdom of storytelling. And it's kind of this playful, interactive game and guide to navigating some of the biases that I explore in the Age of Magical Overthinking, but also others, since so many hundreds of them have been described, including the fundamental attribution error or restraint bias, the denomination effect or optimism bias. This book provides exercises to sharpen your judgment amid all of these biases, these mental magic tricks that we all have and that are sometimes useful, but sometimes don't serve us, especially in this particular time in history. And Vicki Tan is our special guest today. Indecision is clearly a very relatable topic for the listeners of this podcast because those of you who are following us on Instagram at Magical Overthinkers submitted scores of questions for Vicki about this topic. It's interesting because when I think about the ways that cognitive biases interact with our decision-making in the information age, a time when there is this pressure, but also a time when there is this sort of impossible expectation to gobble up all the available information of the internet to make the best decisions about everything from what to eat for dinner to who to vote for. There were a lot of listeners submitted questions asking about the correlation between indecision and anxiety. And I thought this was interesting because I am an anxious girly, but a lot of the time I feel like my cognitive biases actually clash with my anxiety in a way that causes me to make impulsive decisions. Sometimes I think about phrases like ask for forgiveness, not permission. And historically, that has been my modus operandi. My anxiety often causes me to act quickly and jump to conclusions in situations that really should probably require a little bit more deliberative care. But so many of you listeners expressed the opposite experience, finding that anxiety prevents the ability to make choices. I was interested in seeing what science has to say about that correlation, and I did find a paper published in Biological Psychiatry called Anxiety and Decision Making by Catherine A. Hartley and Elizabeth A. Phillips. The study is a little bit old. It was published in 2013, but I think it still applies, and it really flicked on a light bulb in my head because reading this paper, I also recognized very clearly how anxiety causes indecision in me. The paper suggested that anxiety is strongly correlated with indecision, particularly in situations involving uncertainty, potential loss, or ambiguity. In situations where one's anxiety causes them to feel extremely threatened and at risk, cognitive biases like framing effects and loss aversion can take over, often resulting in decision paralysis or overly cautious behavior. The anxiety can impair engagement of prefrontal regulatory systems, the article says, which diminishes the ability to rationally weigh pros and cons or reframe negative possibilities. And without getting too specific, there are absolutely times in my life where I felt threatened, out of control, like I could not predict what might happen, and that caused me to be overly cautious at my own expense. And I think that is a pretty new phenomenon, having to make super abstract existential decisions. The human brain developed for survival, not contending with scores of tiny daily choices like, should I dress cottagecore today or more professional today? All the way to huge high-stakes decisions like, should I start this new business venture? These are modern phenomena, and it's really no wonder that indecision has become such a hot-button topic and so relatable. Our minds simply didn't evolve to make all these choices easily, and that's why phrases to describe this experience have developed like analysis paralysis and chooser's paradox. The idea that too many choices is actually sometimes not a luxury, but can inhibit the ability to live a fully present and active life. Now I really want to get into my interview with Vicki because it was such a stimulating conversation addressing questions like, how can we possibly make informed decisions like where we live if we can't visit everywhere? After I make a decision, I always feel like it's the wrong one. How do I contend with that? I often fear coming across as bossy, so I choose indecisive to let other people take the lead. What's up with that? And how do I stop feeling paralyzed when I find myself in a situation where I have to make a decision on behalf of someone else? These are just a few of the thought spirals that we discussed. So without further ado, allow me to introduce Vicki Tan, author of Ask This Book a Question. Vicki, thank you so much for joining the Magical Overthinkers podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to meet you.
I have been eagerly anticipating this episode because this is a subject that comes up daily, whether I'm talking to people in my life or confronting my own decisions. I don't know if we're entertaining this statement, but I have a lot of Libras in my life. Take that with a grain of salt, but whatever. That is a cultural touchstone, astrology, Libras. It's the scale, they can't make decisions, yada, yada. Let's move on. This is a scientifically informed conversation. Could you please introduce your work to our listeners and how it relates to the subject of indecision?
Yes. So my main work is that I'm a digital product designer and I work at Pinterest, but I have also worked at Spotify and Headspace and Lyft. And most recently, I wrote a book about making better decisions through the lens of cognitive bias. But what I really tried to do was to take all of the things that I learned in product design that make those apps so easy to use and apply that to behavioral science to make it hopefully easy to use while making decisions.
You and I are so aligned in this way. non-behavioral economists who nonetheless find this subject matter a worthy subject to write about, extremely pertinent to our daily life, even in an informal way. But do you see cognitive biases everywhere now? It's helpful, I find, to be able to like identify what's motivating people's behavior. It helps you like forgive
Yeah,
them.
I mean, my poor friends always joke because while I was working on the book and before, I would just call them out. And it's just it's annoying to be that person. But now I know it's come through to them because now they'll say it.
Oh my God, 100%. My partner is always alerting my own writing subjects to me. He'll be like, that's sunk cost fallacy. Don't bend to it. I'm like, okay, good point. No, it is an occupational hazard. My opening question to you, the first question that I present to all my Magical Overthinkers guests, it is, what is an irrational thought spiral that has been living rent-free in your head lately?
Oh, so many. Gosh. I think the one most recently coming off the heels of working on this book, which is in a different industry, but then still working in the tech industry, is what should I do? Or is what I'm doing like worth my time? Or like, especially with all the stuff happening in tech with AI, what is my job even? Or not even what is my job, but like what role can I play in this whole mess of where we are now? And just like kind of going back and forth between wanting to like get the fuck out of this industry versus like doing what I can in it to make it a little bit better. Or like if everyone with morals leaves, it's going to be twice as bad.
Oh my God, I think about this in the context of AI all the time. My AI anxieties lately have been through the roof, both macro and micro anxieties. Micro anxieties like being concerned that authors of certain genres are now like literally outsourcing their writing to AI tools just because of the demand and turnover, and the quality isn't really that important. And I find that so insulting as a person who like loves to write and really values writing as an art form. But then you have like the macro anxieties of the tech race to dominate the super intelligence race and how that might literally lead to an impending apocalypse. And to your point, I think about how as a writer, if I just like completely refuse to acknowledge AI, will that actually ultimately mean locking me out of a conversation that I do want to participate in because I don't want only non-writers to be making decisions about AI's role in creativity. So, it's so stressful.
It's so tricky. Yeah, it's weird with writing as well as with design. I don't know if you've come across any of like the image or the video gen tools. I actually recently came back from a trip to Scotland and all the tourist stuff was made with AI. I was like, what is this? It's already in like tourist merch. And it was really bad. It was like these Scottish coos, but they were AI generated. And I was like, come on, there's real cows. It's like a double whammy because, we make these tools. They also can do the thing that we're doing, kind of like what you're saying with writing. But then also like everyone else can use it too. There's like an analog between the image gen side and the writing side.
Oh, of course.
Ugh, it feels so dire.
It feels really dire. Also, this is like obviously it's not related to the conversation at hand. This is a podcast for overthinkers, and indecision in the digital age is a huge part of overthinking, like that is a main source of overthinking, and AI is like a main character in that whole sense of panic right now. And so I am constantly vacillating between what you're saying, wanting to just like move to the mountains and just do something really analog and really human and almost like antiquated with my time to like reconnect with my humanity, while at the same time not wanting to completely give up on society. That's not me. I actually would never do that. But it's so tricky. It's so tricky. And I mean, I think AI will destroy. This is a scary sentiment that I've never said before, but I genuinely believe that AI would like destroy humanity in a very real way before it would replace artists at the top of their careers.
That sounds right. I mean, we don't have to go into AI sort of existential dread.
Yeah, not today, Satan. Not today. I have been having one of the best summers of my whole entire life, and that is partially because I've randomly been treating my body very well. I want to eat healthier, want to move around a little bit, and in that endeavor, I have been super thankful for Green Chef. Green Chef makes it super easy to spend less time in the kitchen and more time enjoying summer, especially with their new Heat and Eat meals where you can enjoy a healthy, delicious meal in just 3 minutes. Green Chef recipes feature fresh, organic, seasonal produce and responsibly sourced proteins to help you feel your best. Green Chef's real food meals help you build healthy habits without the hassle. They have protein-filled breakfasts, salads that are ready in just 5 minutes. And with week-to-week flexibility, you can change your plan to match your mood and your schedule. I have genuinely enjoyed every recipe that I've made from Green Chef, especially this one bulgur wheat dinner bowl that I keep bragging about because I made it. So if you're strapped for time but still want to eat healthy, I highly recommend Green Chef. Make this summer your healthiest yet with Green Chef. Head to greenchef.com/50magical and use code 50magical to get 50% off your first month, then 20% off for 2 months with free shipping. That's code 50magical at greenchef.com/50magical. Okay. I just have a few expositional questions for you, just so that we and the listeners can all get on the same page in terms of today's topic. And then I want to kick this conversation primarily to the thought spirals that were submitted by our listeners on this subject matter. I think indecisiveness is something that they contend with on a daily basis in a very urgent way. And they submitted some really interesting questions for us to ponder together, not all of which have definitive answers, but I think even discussing them will make everybody feel less alone. If those listening would like to submit a question or thought spiral anonymously for a future subject, a future expert guest, you can follow us on Magical Overthinkers on Instagram to do so. Anyway, before we get into those, I wanted to ask you just a defining question. What counts as indecision, technically, versus just like healthy decision making? And is indecision worse now in the digital age than in the past, in your opinion?
Ooh, I mean, it's funny because I don't actually use the word indecision in the book. I talk a lot about decision making and how different people take different approaches. I don't think that it's an indecision problem. It's that people never really learned how to make decisions. And so I feel like we just kind of get stuck on what's sort of worked for us in the past. And then we tend not to look back. Like once we make a decision, if it's bad in our mind, we do regret it. But if it's good, we don't look back. And I feel like those are the moments when we do need to. I guess if I were to frame indecision in my book, it would just be that perhaps you're not approaching it with a curiosity and that you're sort of imagining it from this one kind of stuck angle. And so a lot of the point of view is like, okay, how can we loosen that? How can we kind of approach it from an angle, maybe that of a cognitive bias, or maybe I can tell you a story to kind of get your gears running in a little bit of a different way.
Yes. Okay. So what's an example of what that curiosity-driven process might look like as opposed to the analysis paralysis or chooser's paradox?
So what's a decision you've had to make recently or have been stuck on, indecisive about?
You know, when it comes to making really high-level abstract strategy decisions in a realm that I don't have a lot of experience in or a lot of education in, I tend to feel, I don't know if this is indecisive, and I liked your points about that term not necessarily being the best way to think about this concept, because I think a lot of people, like with the Libra comment, you know, like identify as indecisive, and that could be limiting because it doesn't necessarily have to be a state of being. But I have found that I second guess my decisions in a way that feels not like me and really uncomfortable when, say, I'm negotiating. I do not feel like a strong strategist when it comes to complex negotiating in contracts. I mean, who is like naturally good at that? Like, I don't know, maybe like bulldogs in the boardroom or whatever, but Yes. When it comes to contract negotiation, I end up feeling quite blighted by imposter syndrome and second guessing.
Oh, that's so relatable. I mean, who hasn't, like, for me, it's just the moment of like a job offer comes in and you have to negotiate the salary and you're like, shit, what if they take it away? So if you're making a decision, about like should I accept this contract sort of, or maybe ask for better terms? I think one example could be, so like you're thinking of it as a binary, a decision, which is this or that. And I think something like, you'll know all the biases, but like an availability bias, which is like these options come to our mind as like, it's only this, but there's probably 10 other things that you could do in this situation. And you might need to research or talk to people you haven't, or like other things to expand those options. But our brain naturally goes to it's yes or no. And so I think that's an example, or there's a way of like framing negotiation. What's something that I've comfortably negotiated in my life? And then kind of using that framing as like, well, I do have the capacity to do that. Let me just bring those tools over into this realm. Or even, I really like to use this blockers framework, which is like, maybe it feels hard to negotiate this thing because emotionally something's getting in the way, or in terms of resource, I don't have the capacity to accept this lower offer. And it has nothing to do with the actual terms, but it has to do with what's in the way. Like maybe my family doesn't support me, or maybe it has like a weird impact on the world. Speaking of our AI combo.
Yes. Oh my God. There's so much magical overthinking and all of that, sort of like overcomplicating or oversimplifying. And I think of magical overthinking as a phenomenon that causes us to overcomplicate and oversimplify the wrong things, But that binary point is simple but so real, because I was just having a conversation with a friend where she was resorting to some binary thinking in a moment of really immobilizing indecision. She's like moving across the country and deciding whether or not to bring her stuff or sell her stuff. And it was this very dramatic sort of black or white thing. And from my perspective as an outsider, as someone who's not in that really like emotional, foreboding position of like staring down the barrel of the rest of your life, and thinking about things that aren't necessarily pertinent to like the task at hand. I was like, okay, well, never discount the power of a pro-con list. Like, I really value those. When I was moving last year, I was a whore for a pro-con list. But also, like, there was something in between selling all the stuff and moving all the stuff. It's like you can go through and think about, is this something I want to store or sell or bring or give to a friend for a short period of time? There are like all these other options, but when you're in that high stakes moment, it can feel like there are only two options.
And I noticed this paradox of people like, okay, the small decisions like Prime Day or something, you're trying to figure out what like TV or electric toothbrush to buy, and you are going like spec by spec. And you're like, okay, like let me get in there. This is what I need. This is what I want. But then with these big ones, because we can't analyze the decision in that way, I think we get overwhelmed and then we're just like, yeah, it's all or nothing. Some of the advice is to borrow a little bit from the other approach when you find yourself like trying to like, okay, I'm moving to a new city, fresh start, fresh stuff. And I feel like there's a lot of people want to go with their gut or their intuition and kind of like, ugh, this is the way. But yeah, bring a little list into that. Or vice versa, like no need to overanalyze all the tiny decisions because it can feel good too, but it can also be a waste of time.
Yeah, I think it's just like a bid for control and manageability, and not everything can be managed or controlled. Which brings me to, I wanted to follow up on the part of that question relating to whether or not indecision or decision making is more challenging in the digital age when there is at least the illusion of limitless options, whether you're talking about where to move or what paper towels to buy.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I mean, this is the thing where We know information overload causes like this feeling of being flooded and then almost like an inability to act. But that's what cognitive biases are for a little bit. Like given all the stuff, like even before this information overload of the digital age, there's a lot of information just sitting outside without computers, right? Sensory information, tactile information. And so what I tried to do in the book was reframe the biases as once you understand them, using them as a way to help you filter through the information. So yes, I think it's like extra a problem now, like so dire, but hopefully we can use those same tools, maybe not always in the same situations, but the same tools in different situations to help us move forward in different ways. So we might still be paralyzed in others, but maybe the next time you buy something, you'll find yourself not rationalizing something that you might have.
Totally. Okay, so I want to get into some of these listener submitted thought spirals. And again, not all of these will have a definitive answer, but we can, just hum a few bars about each one, free associate studies that you've come across, and hopefully that will provide some insight. So the first question goes, is it normal for the question of what do I want to come up empty?
Of course. I mean, I think that's why some of these decisions are hard to make, because we haven't thought about what I or you want, what we want. We don't all want the same thing, but that's kind of what the book is trying to do. Like, you may have started with one question, one decision, and kind of what we were talking about earlier, like all the ways you can expand your understanding of the question, I think might help you understand why you're getting stuck in the first place. So some of it is reframing, but also sitting down and understanding what you want might be a step before that actual decision. So your friend who's moving, she wasn't sure if she wanted to keep all her stuff. It could be that she isn't sure like what is like the ideal future home that she wants, or is her goal actually to like save money. And I think anchoring to that larger question could help, but I guess it depends on your decision.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of sort of like cognitive behavioral therapy techniques that can help you get closer to why something might be stressing you out or why a thought might be immobilizing you or preventing you from making a decision. I always provide like a little nugget of empirically backed wisdom for how we overthinkers can get out of our own heads this week at the end of each episode. And one of them had to do with overcoming a certain potentially irrational anxiety by asking yourself, what's the worst case scenario of this thing that I'm afraid of? And then asking yourself, well, why is that bad? And 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 like following it to the end and seeing if you can cope and realizing like, okay, I'm not going to like die or, whatever. Like the worst case scenario is actually potentially something you can handle. Similarly, you can ask yourself like, if you're struggling to make a decision to, say, go to a more prestigious grad school or a grad school that's less prestigious but located in a more beautiful area, you can ask yourself bigger questions about like, why is prestige important to you? Oh, because I want to make a lot of money. Why do you want to make a lot of money? It's like you can ask yourself questions like that get to like a more existential place. And then maybe you'll be able to have some deeper clarity that way.
I love that. I don't know if you've read Existential Kink. It sounds different than it's about, but she has this thing called the Greatest Fear Inventory. I might be getting the name wrong. And it's exactly what you were describing, but instead of like why for the fear or maybe like peeling back the layer of the fear, it asks you to say, if that happened, like what's your greatest fear there? And then if that I write this book and no one reads it and I have no friends and then I die alone or something like that. Like the sort of consequence of each one. I find that it really, at least if it's like a anxiety or fear driven decision paralysis, it really takes the wind out of the sails of that worry because it's like, okay, that's not going to happen.
Totally. Yeah. That book, by the way, for those who might want to Google it, is Existential Kink, Unmask Your Shadow and Embrace Your Power by Carolyn Elliott, who's a PhD. And That sounds like a really interesting book. Yeah, and obviously, like, we cannot do this exercise for literally every last choice, but that's where, related to what you were saying earlier, allowing some of those cognitive biases, those mental magic tricks, which are there for a reason, to govern some small decisions is not necessarily a bad thing. It's a classic thing to do. It's just that when those cognitive biases first developed in our minds, humans weren't making abstract choices like, do I want to go to a more prestigious grad school? They were just trying to survive being chased by a saber-toothed tiger. This next question is related to what we're talking about. Someone says, how can we make truly informed choices, like where to live, if we can't visit everywhere?
Yes. I mean, of course, we can't visit everywhere, but you can do your research. You can talk to people who have visited places or have, actually more importantly, lived there. But yeah, I suppose the question stands like, if you can't know everything, how can you make an informed choice? I think you can do a pretty good job of like your due diligence, and then you're going to have to like run with it from there. But I think that's okay. Part of it is being comfortable with the idea that, like, in the grad school example, I imagine both schools are pretty good, and there's the thing, we know called hindsight bias, which makes it feel like in the past that we could have known more. And I think sometimes that makes it feel like we could have made a better decision. But like in reality, focusing on the idea that like both of these, say, universities or cities are going to have really valid, amazing reasons to be there. And if you can kind of just like stay with that, no matter what choice you make, there will be some kind of wanting to look back and be like, it could have been better. But to what end, right?
I love what you're saying because it's so optimistic. And I think that relates to the invitation to be more curious about your decision making. It's like a sort of very hopeful way of reframing indecision is that if you're struggling between 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 choices, maybe that struggle is a result of the fact that those are all potentially good choices, and what a privilege to have choices. And at the same time, I think there is a pressure, and I address this in the Age of Magical Overthinking, in the so-called information age, to gather all of the information that is knowable and then make a choice. And that is simply impossible. That's not how humans have ever made choices. Up until fairly recently, human beings never made broad, heavy, existential life choices. You would make choices literally just based on how to get through the next day, how to find food, how not to be eaten, how not to be attacked, whatever. And I think there's a little bit of ego in the information age, and we've been misled to think that, like, we can fact check everything, we can know everything, everything is Googleable. First of all, we forget everything we Google. It's called the Google effect. We instantly forget the things that we Google, and not only that, we forget that we forgot these things. So we don't even know what we think we know, and thus we need to surrender in a lot of ways to the idea that human beings have never and will never be able to make a perfectly informed decision about anything.
Right. I mean, like, and what does that get you? You know, like the reality of information is changing every day. And so better to do what you can. Don't not research it, but to get caught up in sort of like that extra, 20% that you can't know feels like you lost the plot a bit of like the bigger picture. But yeah, I like to think that no matter what I choose, you can choose to feel like you could have known more. I hate to say it's all up to you, but a lot of it is up to you.
I know. And like, I think it would be helpful to try and delude yourself into thinking that's fun. I think something that helps me with indecision, this is totally anecdotal. I don't know if there's science or psychology to support this, but something that I think has helped me in the past is by having really strong favorites and like sticking to those favorites. There are downsides to that too. Like, we should all be free to change our minds and pick new favorites and da-da-da. But like, if I have cast myself as someone who likes Halloween, that's my favorite holiday is Halloween, and my favorite fruit is stone fruit and berries, and my favorite books are XYZ, and my favorite way to spend an afternoon is this. Well, those strong preferences can help me make a decision of where I want to go on vacation or what I want to eat for dinner. Like you can always go back to the Pinterest board in your mind of who you are.
Yeah, I love that. Another way to think about that is, have you heard of the term like choice bracketing? It's just the idea that for example, if you choose them in aggregate, you don't have to choose them one by one. And you'll make better decisions for yourself when you look at them kind of from that bird's eye view. So if you do like a certain type of vacation, you can make that at the start of the year. And in theory, the choices will be more aligned with your values than if you were just to make them like ad hoc during the month. So it saves you time and you get to do what you say you want to do when you're not like stressed or in the moment.
Ooh, I love that. And it reminds me of this business executive whose work I quoted in the Age of Magical Overthinking, this guy named Peter Drucker, who published a few dozen books over the course of his life on time management, specifically with regard to the workplace, but I think it's more broadly applicable than that. He really emphasized the importance of not only efficiency, but effectiveness. And he has a couple quotes I would love to share. One thing he says in this book called The Effective Executive is efficiency is doing things right. Effectiveness is doing the right things. And there is nothing quite so useless as doing with great efficiency something that should not be done at all. So one of the signature techniques that he came up with to help make effective and efficient decisions was to create an urgent versus important matrix, which I think in broader life could be thought of as a time meaning matrix. So, for example, a task is not necessarily meaningful just because it's pressing and vice versa. Certain things are both, like in the workplace, a project with a close deadline, but most things in life are either one or the other, and some things are actually neither. For example, like networking is important but not urgent, something you can do later. A meeting where you're not a key player might be urgent but not important, something to put less effort into or even delegate. And then certain things feel urgent or feel important, but they're actually not pressing or meaningful. And I don't know, I think of how that applies to like everyday decisions, like holding my partner's hand is not a timely matter, but it is meaningful. And I want to make sure to prioritize that. And a bout of like social media drama might feel urgent, but it's never important. In fact, it's probably neither urgent or important. It's, quote, something that should not be done at all. So I think like those things can help us make better use of our time, the bracketing and the time meaning matrix.
Yeah, I love that. I have a similar kind of scale, maybe different XY axes in my book where there's like a scale of eventual and urgent, like that time scale. And then the other axis is everyday and once in a lifetime. And you sort of create these quadrants where I think we're always focused on like the everyday urgent stuff, like that can become a time suck, social media sort of urgent things. And then once in a lifetime stuff that feels urgent, like an exploding opportunity. But the stuff on like the eventual side, like an everyday eventual thing, I feel like we don't talk about that. You might overlook that stuff. And then speaking of indecision, I call it rumination in the book, but I think the eventual once in a lifetime stuff is where like the rumination happens because there's no pressing need and it may or may not happen, but you don't have to think about it at all. So I feel like some of the decision making is like all of your efforts are here, but you can shift them to the other end if you want.
Yeah. And hopefully by focusing with direct attention on some of these little tools or tricks with practice, you'll end up naturally incorporating them into your decision making.
I hope so. I hope it doesn't feel like, let me consult this list of stuff.
Yeah. And I'm saying the word you like in a second person or fourth person way in all of this, but I'm also talking to myself, by the way. Let's talk more about that hindsight stuff because someone asks, after I make a decision, it always feels like I made the wrong choice. So could you talk a little bit about decision regret? Because the thing that comes to mind for me, this is solo stakes, but I have some friends who always regret what they order in a restaurant as soon as they tell the server what they want. And then the food comes and everybody else's order looks better to them. How do you overcome that sense of regret?
Well, My question is, was there something on the menu that they knew they wanted, but they wanted to try something different? I wonder. But hindsight bias, for anyone who doesn't know, is just this idea that we feel like things that have already happened were more likely to happen than things that didn't. Or another way to say that is our current self has more information than our past self had, which is why things look clearer in hindsight, like through the rear view mirror. And so the dish one is kind of a funny example because there are other dishes for them to actually see. So the alternate realities that they didn't choose are there for them. Whereas in most cases, you won't be able to see yourself playing out the other scenarios that you didn't choose, although you might see your friends going to the places you didn't go. The thing is, you'll never have all of the information, maybe with the exception at the dinner table, of how they're experiencing that thing or how you would have experienced that thing. You only have what you think it is. And so hindsight bias is such a tricky one because I feel like if you understand its tendency, you can give yourself a little bit more grace and acceptance like we were talking about earlier. But when you lean into it without being aware, it can easily make you just feel bad. So why feel bad?
Great question. Why feel bad? Yeah, earlier in this episode, I discussed the correlation between anxiety and indecision and some research that has been published on that front. And I do think that if indecision really does cause you to feel bad in a way that like interferes with your life on a daily basis, that might not be quite normal and healthy and like could be worth exploring with a mental health professional. Just wanted to call that out. So speaking of mental health, this podcast is obviously not therapy. Neither of us are therapists, but we do talk about feelings and thoughts and experiences. So I want to carve out a little bit of space for Magical Overthinkers listener submitted thought spirals that were a little more personal. We're not going to be able to provide any like therapy wisdom in response to these questions, but I just wanted to state them aloud just so that listeners can hear them because I think they're relatable and feeling like other people have the same thoughts is sometimes helpful in itself. One person says, I don't want to come off as bossy, so instead I'm indecisive because it's safer to let someone else lead.
So relatable. In the workplace, I assume they're saying. It's interesting that they said bossy. I do feel like I can only speak for myself, but in the groups that I've been in, women who tend to speak in very, definitive, couched ways are interpreted as a little bit more like bold or pushy or bossy is one way of saying it. I would pull that one apart because I'd be curious if there's a way for the listener to say what they are thinking and if they feel like they know the answer, or is it the indecision where they're like, do they know the answer and they're not saying, or do they not know the answer whatsoever?
It's interesting because, you know, my first book is about language and gender. I unpack a lot of gender-coded insults or problematic standards for women's behavior represented by terms like bossy or shrill, etc. And I talk about the double bind and how women are expected to embody likability and niceness and be sort of demure and submissive. And this isn't quite related to the question, but if they hope to have any kind of public position of authority, they're going to inherently encounter, which is a position that demands assertiveness and, all of these qualities that are inherently not celebrated in women. They are going to confront a catch-22 or a problem navigating both of those things because femininity is stereotypically a private domestic thing and stereotypically masculine features are seen as more public. But anywho, I wouldn't naturally equate bossiness and decisiveness. That sounds unique to me. And so I might invite this listener to ask themselves what might be responsible for that correlation. Because I sometimes, I think about like a mom making all of the household decisions and being kind of the decision maker in many ways for a family. So I don't think inherently decisiveness and bossiness are related. And so that might be worth unpacking.
Yeah, I think I was zeroing on the same thing. There's like a couple steps in between there of like bossiness and then the delivery and then the actual making of the choice and the responsibility.
This next question is very much related. I get especially overwhelmed when it comes to making decisions for someone else. How do I stop feeling paralyzed when I have to do this?
Ooh. My first question is why? Why do you think you have to make decisions for someone else? Is it a child?
Is it a kid? Is it like a friend being like, oh, I'm 10 minutes late to drinks, just like order me something?
Right,
or
right.
Like, I don't know why like menu items are top of mind for me.
Or is it like a partner or friend who, oh, pack a bag for me or something? I guess the first inclination was to question why we have to. I do sometimes feel like we feel the need to, like when someone comes to us for advice or learning our experience or something, I do sometimes think we assume we have to help them make the decision, which we don't. But yeah, given you do, I would just try to be a proxy for the person. Like, where are they coming from? What do they value? Like, what are they trying to get out of this menu item? It's hard when so many options.
I think it reflects well on this listener that they're so concerned about making the right decision for this person in their life. But I do think it comes back to people hate making decisions. Making decisions is hard and overwhelming for everyone to varying degrees. I do believe that to be true. And so you can see making decisions for that person with care and, like you're saying, with empathy and all of that is a gift.
I suppose I'd have one follow-on, which is why is it this person as well? Are they like critical or picky or something like that? And that you could kind of try to understand what makes it hard in that relationship to do that for them. Because some people are very easygoing.
Yes. That's a good point because we received a few questions from people who seem to fear making decisions that would make someone in their life upset. And that made me think there are people who I've known in the past where like I made a decision for us that I thought was the right decision and they like flipped out. And that type of trauma even could encourage indecision in the future. Now, thank God, I'm surrounded by people in my life who, like, if I chose what to order for dinner for them, or if I made, a larger decision too, I think they would be really appreciative, or at least they would like phrase their feedback nicely. I think people who flip out at other people's bad decisions, they need to learn more about cognitive biases, in my opinion.
Read the book.
Read the books, people. Okay, this is the last question I'll ask, and it's kind of rhetorical, but I think we can express a few sentiments to make this asker feel better. If I can't make a decision on simple things like dinner, am I still an independent, strong woman?
Oh my God, yes, of course. It just means you have probably so many things going on that simply doing this everyday chore, which you have to do every freaking day and for a long time. And it means that you, like you were saying, it means that you care. You're not just about to eat like whatever it is, trash every night. So I think so many things we can say about this.
Oh my gosh, I just had like a light bulb go off in my head about girl dinner, that like slang phrase,
Yeah.
zeitgeisty phenomenon, whatever. I thought it was like not offensive, but a little bit demeaning to like describe a busy woman shoving a handful of pretzels and a cheese stick in her mouth as girl dinner, because it seemed to imply to me that she was childlike and a mess and like incapable of taking care of herself. But now I'm just realizing like a lot of domestic responsibilities, like what to make for dinner, what to eat for dinner, tend still even to fall on women. And so often like people are eating girl dinner when like their family is out of the house. That's just like taking the burden of what to decide to eat for dinner off of you. And you're just like, oh my God, I'm just gonna like shove some Cinnamon Toast Crunch in my mouth. Like, it's not girl dinner. It's like decisive woman dinner.
Right. There's so much emotional caring, so much like baggage we're carrying for other people that happens unconsciously, or maybe it's the expectation that we will, so that this is one decision that we've offloaded or we've simplified. I think it's a strategy.
Yes, exactly. Because I think there's also this implication that like, oh my God, like girls don't eat, like. And it's like, no, in the past when I've had girl dinner, it's literally just because I was like, this is easy. So sue me, I like little olives. I like little bowls of snacks. I don't care about getting 150 grams of protein a day, all right?
Right, like men will be either like crazy protein or like fast food.
I know. Why isn't that boy dinner? My close friend's ex-husband literally just used to eat like 6 hard-boiled eggs and a chicken breast for dinner. That is so much creepier than a fistful of pretzels and 7 Cornish pickles.
Oh my God. And then don't even talk about, Soylent. Men invented that.
Don't get me started.
Oh my God.
Actually, I heard about Soylent from my mom because my mom is a high-achieving cancer researcher and was like, I just need to get in my nutrients so that I can keep solving cancer. And then the boys co-opted Soylent because they think they're more productive than we are. Whatever.
Wow. Is it even good for you? It's so old. We can't talk about it.
Yeah, it's hyper-processed, I'll tell you that. All right. How did we get here? Anyway, Vicky, your dream. I have one final question for you, and that is, what do you think is the number one thing people are overthinking with respect to indecision? And what is the number one thing people are underthinking?
Ooh. We kind of danced around it, but I think people are overthinking the idea that there is a right decision, that the idea that this is the one, like the thing. And so let it go. Be open to all these other possibilities that exist for you. I think we'll all end up a little bit more content with where we are. The underthinking, we did kind of dance around this too, but like there's so many decisions that fly under the radar that get not enough thought. So sometimes it's what we're eating because we're in a hurry to do it. Sometimes it's like, I don't know, there are these sort of benign decisions that add up over time or add up over frequency that we don't think about. Like every night when we sit down to watch something in front of the TV or when we go to read something, we're making these little decisions. And then all of a sudden over like 10 years, what have we consumed? I mean, trash kind of.
Oh, that is such a good point. We sort of like mindlessly cruise through our media consumption a lot of the time as we overthink what cocktail to order. And it's like, maybe those should be flipped.
But like, I do think we could use to like shift that focus. It feels serious sometimes or uncomfortable to look at our lives from that vantage point. But if we can, and then set some of those decisions, and it doesn't all have to be around like put your phone in a box or whatever, but it can be other subtle things like you choose to live in a city that has more nature than culture, even though at first blush it seems boring, but like you might find that like your habits are more healthy. You might find that like the people you're surrounded with are more active or something like that. And so, I don't know, it's like we may already feel decision fatigue and overwhelm. Let some of those ones go a little bit and focus on these other ones.
Oh my God, what you just said reminded me of another thing that plays into like the illusion of binary choice. You can always course correct later. Like my friend who's moving and like is hyper fixated on making the right choice of apartment and the perfect choice of moving company and whatever. I'm like, you can just start making decisions. And then if it's not working out, pivot a little bit or decide something different next time. Like no one moves through life making perfect decisions, no matter how many pro-con lists they make at every turn. And like the number of mistakes that I've made, the analogy that I was using was like, you just have to get a first draft down so that you can edit later. Like that's true in writing. And I think that's true in life decisions. Like you just have to get some decisions down on paper and then you can edit later.
I have a little story in my book that's called Good at Quitting, and it has to do with how, I used to be a little self-conscious that I was a quitter, like it was a bad thing. And then I sort of I reframed it as like, I'm not deterred by the potential loss aversion when you quit quit your job. I think a lot of people focus on the downside, which is, yeah, you might lose your income insurance and whatever friends you have at your job, but the upside could be so much more. You could have a higher paying job, better whatever benefits, and certainly a new opportunity. And you won't ever know that unless you at least try. And so when you quit once, it's very scary, and you quit twice, it's less scary. And then by the third time, you're flying, you're a freaking pro.
Oh my gosh, that reminds me of another reason why indecision is probably more challenging in the digital age, because as social media users, our decisions are being recorded and surveilled. So we might feel more pressure to honor our prior decisions so that we look like consistent people who know what's best for us and have a strong vision for our life and our happiness. And when we decide to make another decision, there are potentially like hundreds or thousands of judgy eyeballs, which was not true necessarily before social media.
Ugh, everything is recorded. This podcast will live on the interweb for decades. Eons.
Yes, and please send it to everyone you know. Vicky, thank you so much for joining this episode of Magical Overthinkers. If folks want to keep up with you and your work and buy your book, where can they do that?
Oh, it was so great to be on here. Thank you for having me. And my book is available on my website, vickytan.com, or just at bookstores. Go to your local bookstore retailer and ask them for it. Ask this book a question. Otherwise, you can find me on Instagram at Vicky Heart, like the shape.
Amazing. And thank you, listeners, so much for tuning in for another episode. Now's that time where I share a nugget of evidence-based wisdom for how we overthinkers can get out of our own heads this week. This one is inspired by that article that I referenced in the intro of this episode, titled Anxiety and Decision Making by Catherine Hartley and Elizabeth Phelps. One tip that the article suggests for overcoming some of this anxiety-induced indecision has to do with something that's referred to in psychology literature as extinction training. Extinction training refers to the process of unlearning a fear association by repeatedly experiencing a feared stimulus without the negative outcome that you expect. It's kind of like an exposure therapy technique, but it can also be adapted for day-to-day decision-making scenarios. So here's an example. Let's say you feel indecisive because you've been put in a position where you have to make decisions on behalf of a group, like in a workplace setting. Say you're leading a team and you're afraid to commit to a certain direction, like choosing a marketing strategy or a product design or a timeline, because maybe you have anxiety about disappointing others or making the wrong call or being blamed for negative outcomes. So you defer the decision, you seek endless output, you seek endless input, or you just kind of like take a backseat and hope that a consensus just emerges on its own. In a situation like that, you can use extinction training by, say, starting with low-stakes group decisions, like choose something relatively minor to decide, even just a team meeting format. Make the decision deliberately, communicate it clearly, and move forward. And then you might make it a goal for yourself to resist the urge to over-explain or apologize. Like, instead of justifying why you made that small choice, you might say, this is the direction we're trying this week, we'll review it and adjust if needed. And that models confidence, but also leaves room for, iteration without perfectionism, that kind of thing. And in a lot of cases, members of a group, whether it is like a professional team like this or even a friend group, won't react negatively to that decisiveness. They'll actually appreciate the clarity. And even if there is some mild disagreement, you might notice that the consequences are pretty manageable. And all of this can train your brain to tolerate uncertainty and social judgment, which can help you shift away from avoidant indecision to decisive action with flexibility. I hope that provided some insight. Thank you again for listening. I hope you tune in a couple of weeks. And until the next time, remember, think it over, just don't overthink it. Magical Overthinkers was created and hosted by Amanda Montell and edited by Jordan Moore of The Pod Cabin. Our theme music is by Casey Kolb. Thank you to our magical manager, Katie Epperson, coordinator, Reese Oliver, and Network Studio 71. Be sure to follow the pod on Instagram at Magical Overthinkers. We're also on YouTube, link in show notes, and ad-free episodes as well as behind-the-scenes extras are available on the Magical Overthinkers Substack at amandamontell.substack.com.